welcome to Sunday Unpacked. It's Monica and Pastor James. How are you doing today?
Good. It's good to be together and good to talk about something I didn't preach. So,
Yeah,
can't pick on me.
right. Well, we do have adversity, and we're just hoping that we can make it through our technological
Wow. Yeah, we had
adversity.
we had some
that we've
Sunday for sure. Hopefully, it'll be better this week.
Well, and today in chapel because we're recording on Wednesday instead of
Yes.
Tuesday like normal. So yeah, let's just really hope that we can make it through today and that everything goes good. So Sunday, Dave Rokup was here and he talked about the ministry of TCM.
Right.
And one of the things that he was talking about was what it's like to live in a country where people have to hide to
Right.
study scripture. And
Right. Because it's a ministry that trains Christian leaders from all over Europe and now
right.
even into Africa, and in many of those countries, and some in
Yeah.
Asia too. In many of those countries, they may face various forms of opposition or even outright persecution.
Yeah. It's crazy what we don't
Yeah.
know about, I think.
Right.
Some of the things
Right.
that people live through and have to face with their faith every day. Can oppression be an incentive to draw closer to God through kind of more focused listening and studying when you're actually given the opportunity?
I think so. I mean, I have to say, as far as real persecution, I haven't experienced it, so it's not like I can speak to it from my own personal knowledge of what that's like. But I think as we look at Christians through history, maybe we go in one or two ways. The opposition for some people is so heavy and so much that it drives them from faith. I mean, that can be a result of opposition, and usually that's what it's designed to do. But for many people, it's an adventure and a journey, probably is a better word, a journey of closer dependence on God. I think there are lots of people that when they face opposition or persecution, their reaction to that is to focus on the God that they serve and to focus on what Jesus went through and to develop a deeper dependence on his strength and his spirit rather than walking away.
Right. I think we've heard stories of that throughout
Sure.
history. There are a lot of people that went through like the concentration camps and Anne Frank as a young girl
Right.
reading the diary of Anne Frank and things like that. I think that they draw on their strength, on their faith. They draw on because they don't have any other thing to draw on. They have to draw on
There's
their faith,
nothing else.
I guess. I think Acts 4 kind of supports this thought. Do you think that there's evidence in Acts 4
Well,
that
it's clear
supports
that
it?
they gather together, and what do? They pray. So
Yeah.
their response to the opposition that they were facing was to pray about it. So it seems to me that is their reaction to it all, that they
Right.
go to God rather than panic or, even they go to God certainly in the midst of the struggle. But it seems that it's not just about fear. It's about, okay, in the midst of this, we want to do what God has called us to do. So they're still focused in on the mission that God's given them.
Right. I think it's very clear that Peter is drawing on something because before the resurrection, he's all, no, I don't know him. Who?
Right.
No, not me. And he even
Right.
curses so that people don't know he's one of Jesus' followers. And yet, post-resurrection, after he's watched Jesus be crucified and then raised from the dead, now he's all of a sudden like, oh, you think you want to kill me? Okay, go ahead. But you're the one that killed Jesus Christ. And,
That's right.
he's just so bold. And, it's like a light bulb went on in his head with Jesus' resurrection, or maybe
It's
it
a
was
clear change. It
those,
definitely is.
Yeah, those 40 days spent with post-resurrected Jesus and the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and all of a sudden their eyes are opened and they see the meanings of some of the things Jesus was trying to tell them
That's
about.
right.
And then they pray for boldness
Protection.
instead of protection and freedom from adversity. They pray for
Right.
boldness and courage. And oh my
Right.
goodness, what a testimony that is. So your next sermon Sunday, this coming Sunday, is going to be on, I think that's the 16th, November
Yep.
16th.
Yep.
It's going to be based on chapter 9, correct? That's what we
Correct.
talked about last time.
Right.
And
That's
that
exactly
is
right.
Saul's conversion to Paul.
Yep. Well,
So,
yeah. He's actually not known as Paul yet, but the point is it's his
Right,
conversion
yeah.
into to follow Jesus. So,
Yeah.
yes.
so there's chapter 5, 6, 7, and 8, 4 chapters in between
lot.
there. So
There's
you
a
want
lot
to
there.
talk about those right now today?
Sure.
Wow,
Yep.
right. So chapter 5, I think, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are all about adversity.
They are, and I mean, just encourage people because we don't have time to cover them in detail to be reading those.
Oh, my
they're
gosh.
part of the reading plan for the year, and I
Yeah.
would just say these are great stories, powerful stories.
They're-
So
Yeah.
don't miss them because we're not covering them.
It was really hard for me to pick and choose what to focus on because there's so many things.
Even in each chapter, there's
In
a lot
each chapter,
going on.
well, chapter
Yep.
5, you've got Ananias and Sapphira. We didn't even talk about that. Their adversity was of their own making.
Right.
And, I had a whole nother section of this podcast, questions and talking on unity, but we don't have time to cover all of it because there's
Right.
just so much.
There's just too much. Yeah.
So we're just going to focus on the adversity. So, chapter 5, a huge thing for me in chapter 5 is that during the arrest and persecution of the apostles, this man named Gamaliel speaks out to keep them from being put to death.
Right.
So, do we need to read a little bit about that?
Well, I think the key is if we get down to they've been accused and what are we going to do with them? If we get down to about, I think the key verses are he talks about Jesus and he talks about some other people who claimed to be the Messiah and came to nothing, right? Because they weren't
Right.
the Messiah. And then he says this in 38 and 39. Therefore, in the present case, I advise you, leave these men alone, let them go, for if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail, right? So if Jesus was, theoretically a Messiah or a claimed Messiah,
Yeah.
but he's not really, well, nothing to worry about. It'll eventually fade away. But if it is from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourselves fighting against God. So here's a Pharisee, a teacher, a well-known teacher who's among this, group of, what's the Sanhedrin? And these are the people in charge. And he's basically saying, listen, think before you act, because if you're acting against God, you're not going to be successful. And if this isn't real, it's not going to be successful. So he's urging caution, and he's urging, I think, prudence. Use your mind here. Don't just react against something that feels threatening, but think it through. And they do.
But they still have the apostles flogged.
Well, sure, right, yeah.
And then
But they don't kill them.
They don't kill them, right. So what do we know about Gamaliel, and how much of a role does he play in the growth of the early church?
Well, there are some ancient texts that say that Gamaliel became a Christian. Most historians doubt that is accurate. Okay, what we do know is that he's a well-respected Jewish teacher. Likely a teacher of Paul, though even, we don't know as much about that as we'd like to know. Let's put it that way. And beyond that, again, we do have some teachings of his, and we know that he was well respected, he was knowledgeable in the law, all those things. But there's not a whole lot more that we do know. And certainly he would not have been active in spreading the gospel as a Jewish teacher. Probably not for this, but he also recognizes that if God's for it, then we need to give it space, which is
Right.
good wisdom.
Yeah. I just wonder what, as the weeks go and we see chapters 6, 7, and 8 unfold, and even chapter 9, I wonder where he was in the background and what was going on in
Yeah,
his
and
mind as he watched all this, because we really don't hear anything more
We
about him.
don't. We don't. It would be great to know.
It would.
But we don't know. And as you're right, as we talk through these next few stories, was he still in the Sanhedrin? Was he somewhere else at the time?
Yeah.
What words did he speak? How did he react to any of this? I wish we knew, but we just don't.
Yeah. I was wondering if he intentionally helped the cause of the early church, or was he just protecting the office of the high priest and the Jewish elite from doing something rash and something they'd regret later, like Jesus, when they crucified
Right.
Jesus. It only caused more problems for him. Mm-hmm. So,
I think if we paint this in the most positive light possible, what we see is a man who is concerned about the work of God.
yeah.
And he's making space for God to be at work, which I think is a good thing. I mean, there are times when Christian leaders sometimes react against things because it's different or uncomfortable, and so we're like, "Oh, I don't know about that. That doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem well." Maybe we should be a little bit more like Gamaliel here and say, well, if that's just a human thing, it's probably going to eventually fade away. But if God's at work in this, we might want to make room for it.
Yeah.
Now, there's probably maybe more cynical ways to explain his behavior. Maybe he really is just protecting the Jewish establishment from doing something stupid. It's possible. I mean, again, we can't read his mind.
Right. For sure.
But he is a man of extremely high reputation, so it makes me want to at least allow for the possibility that he's just sharing his wisdom
Yeah.
and trying to help them do the right thing.
Yeah. It would really be cool to have more information on him.
It really would. It really would.
Yeah. So chapter 6, we're going to move on to chapter 6. There's some conflict in the early church. There's increasing number of believers, and, we hear a few times about them being one community, having everything in common.
Right.
And that is going to probably cause some issues.
Sure.
And chapter 6 specifically gets into complaints between Hellenistic Jews and Hebraic Jews. So, what is the difference? Is language the only difference between the Hellenistic Jewish widows and the Hebraic Jewish widows?
Let's make a distinction there too, that
Yeah.
we're not just talking about Hellenistic and Hebraic Jews. We're talking about Hellenistic and Hebraic Jews who are now Christians.
Right. Okay.
So this
yeah.
is within the church, right?
Right.
So you have Jews who basically grew up in what we would call Israel, Palestine, and they would have spoken Aramaic, which was related to Hebrew, and so they would have been the locals. And then you've got the people who grew up other places in the Roman Empire, maybe in what we call Turkey, maybe in Greece, maybe in Rome or Italy itself, maybe in places like Alexandria. There's a large Jewish population in Alexandria, which was, that we think, oh, that's Egypt. Well, it was Egypt, but it was highly influenced by Greek culture. So those people might come back to Israel, Palestine, and come back for festivals, come back for a festival, and then hear about this Jesus movement and end up following that and stay. So we have some Christians who are locals and some Christians who are from somewhere else. And one of the basic differences between these groups is their native language. Is it Aramaic or is it Greek? Now, a lot of these people would have spoken both, but it's all about, are you from here or not? Which is that's a common human way of looking at people. The people who are natives and the people who are not.
But they were all natives before they were exiled earlier in the, like, what was it, 400 BC?
Yeah, so these are all Jews. I mean, they're all
They're all
descendants of
Jews.
Jacob, all
Right.
of them. But they have scattered. And they've scattered for any number of reasons.
lot of
Maybe it's
reasons.
because of famine, and so they've
Yeah.
gone to where the food is. Maybe they just hear of business opportunities and they go somewhere else. I mean, it's migration, which is, if you look at human history, is always going on
Yeah.
and always has an effect. So that's what's happened. So they all have the same ancestry. They're all descendants of the people that we talk about in the Old Testament. But they do speak different languages, and they're part of two different cultures. I mean, they grew up in different ways. And growing up in Western Turkey, which was heavily Greek-oriented, influenced, versus growing up in Palestine, which has such a heavy Jewish emphasis, they would have come at this different. And probably the people who are locals are maybe at least stricter in their obedience of the law. It's not as if any of them said, "Oh, we don't care about the law, that's no big deal," but they probably were a little more careful in some ways. So, but the issue is each group had widows, and the widows of the locals are being fed by the church. Again, all these people are Christians. And the widows among the people who have come from other places are being ignored. And so that issue is raised and has to be resolved.
Right. Was Peter being derogatory when he made the comment that they needed to be, it wouldn't be right for us to neglect the ministry of the Word of God in order to
Right.
wait on tables? Is he being derogatory with that wait on tables comment?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't.
I think what Peter's saying is, hey, listen, everybody's got their role, and we are witnesses of everything that happened in Jesus' ministry. And if we're arranging for food distribution, then how are we going to be doing the teaching that we need to do? And we're
Right.
called to have a ministry of the Word, and we can't do that if we're doing something else. And it's not that somehow this job was too lowly for them. So no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to serve in the food pantry. It was more, if we do this, who's going to teach? So I don't think it's derogatory at all. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I think they were saying there's a need here, who wants to meet it?
Exactly.
And so that we can take care of everybody.
An important need. I mean, you got
Yeah.
people who need food.
Yeah, right. And then they chose the 7 to be kind of representatives or leaders of the church.
And they all seem to be Hellenistic Jewish men who are now Christians.
Right. And Stephen, man, I want a waiter like Stephen.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Stephen is full of God's grace and power, performing great wonders and signs among the people as he's managing handing out food or the distribution of necessities. And yeah,
Which tells you that they weren't just handing out the food.
right, exactly. They were filled with the Spirit and had ministry.
Right.
So then, as Stephen is, I guess, waiting tables and meeting the needs of people and performing signs and wonders, some opposition from members of the synagogue of the freedmen. Now,
As it was called,
as it was
Luke
called,
tells us.
yeah, and that's in verse 9.
Right.
So who are these synagogue of the freedmen? Who are they? And are they important?
Well, we don't have a lot of reference to it anywhere else, so it's hard to know for sure. But, I mean, the fact that they're called the freed men means likely these men had been, what they all had in common was number one, they're Jewish. Number two, they've all been slaves at some point. And
Okay.
either they bought
Yeah.
their own freedom
Mm-hmm.
or they've been freed by someone else. So somehow they were enslaved. Maybe they were even enslaved for a certain time, like an indentured servant. And they served for that amount of time, and then they had their freedom. So that's what these men hold in common. And they formed a synagogue, which required 10 Jewish men.
Okay.
And that's where they worship and learn together. And for some reason, they particularly are opposing Stephen.
Okay. So it says Jews of Cyrene and Alexandria, as well as the provinces of Cilicia and Asia,
Yeah.
and they began to argue with Stephen, but they
They're
could
from,
not.
I mean, what Luke is telling us is they're from all over.
They're from all over. Yeah.
North Africa, all the way around to
That's crazy.
southeastern Turkey.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, they're not just from one place.
And they couldn't stand up against the wisdom that the Spirit gave Stephen to speak.
Right.
And so they wanted to make an example of Stephen, but the more they complained about him or listened to him, everyone who was sitting in the Sanhedrin, verse 15, looked intently at Stephen, and they saw that his face was like the face of an angel.
Mm-hmm.
What is significant about this? How did he have the face of an angel?
Well, that's a good question. Wish I'd
Yeah.
been there and I could answer it for you, right? We don't know. I mean, did it glow in some
Yeah.
way? My guess is that's probably it, but I don't know that. But what they're seeing, I think, is God is at work in him in this moment, right? That there is something that is clear to everyone, that the presence of God through his Spirit
Yeah.
is on this man. Now, exactly what that looked like, I don't know, but it seems as though everyone knew it. It was
Yeah.
evident.
It reminds me almost of when Moses was conversing with God face to face.
Yeah, sure.
And had to come out veiled because
Cover
the
his
glory of
face,
the
sure.
Lord shone on him. And it's almost like they didn't know how to explain it, and that's what they saw the glory. I
Very
mean,
likely.
that's totally my opinion. I don't have any
No,
basis.
I think that's
but
as good
it's-
as anything. I
and,
don't know
yeah.
any other better way to say it, but I think that
So I
very
just
well
feel
could
like
be.
I think there was something about it that they knew was higher than their understanding.
Yeah.
So that brings us to chapter 7, where Stephen starts defending himself with a history lesson of the Israelites. He tells them about the glory of God appearing to Abraham and then leaving his country, and then he didn't have an inheritance, so God promised him an inheritance, and talks about the promised land, which is now where they were living. He goes from Abraham to Moses.
Yeah.
And what would you say is the main focus of Stephen's history lesson here?
Over and over, the people of God have rejected him, and you're just like them. I
Yep.
mean, that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
You're not listening to what God is doing in Jesus, and in that, you're showing yourself to be just like your forefathers who continued to disobey God. That's the long and the short of it in my mind.
Yeah. I think in your sermon series, The Story of God's Love, you kind of have made the statements or the differentiation between Adam and Eve wanting to be in charge of life and God wanting to be in charge of life. And it feels like that's what's going on here.
I think that's fair.
The Jewish leadership wants to be in charge. They don't want to allow God to be in charge because of all of their knowledge. They think they've got it all figured out. And why would God do something different than what we think is going to happen or what is good and what
Right.
is
So he
right?
must not have. So let's
Yeah.
reject these people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like they didn't want a world where God was in charge.
Yeah.
So we go on throughout chapter 7, and Stephen is just giving them what for.
He is.
And I love it. If you
And
have
they
not,
don't like it.
they don't like it. If our listeners have not read this, they need to read chapter 7
Yeah.
because it is good. It is really good. Sadly, the Sanhedrin, they just get madder and madder.
They
And,
do. Until they're just in a rage.
Right. So, what does Luke mean in verse 54 when he says they gnashed their teeth?
I think it's they're so angry. It's like their face is just tight with anger and their
Yeah.
teeth are set. They're clenched and they're just so mad that it's evident in everything that they're doing, saying just the way they look, you can tell their anger is just boiling over.
Yeah.
You know.
And as they're all getting madder and madder, Stephen stands and Stephen looks up at the heaven and says he sees the glory of God standing
Yeah.
at the right hand, or the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. I see heaven open, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, I don't think that went over very well.
I don't think it did.
No.
They all covered their ears, yelled at the top of their voices, and rushed at him, dragged him out of the city, and began to stone him. So, where were the Roman guards?
Yeah, so when Jesus is accused, they have to turn him over to Pilate so
Right.
that because they don't have the authority to kill him.
Right.
It seems this just boils over
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
I don't know that they have any more right. Maybe because it's blasphemy and they have a different sort of dispensation to administer justice if it's blasphemy. But I think they're not thinking about the rules and regulations. I think they just want this guy dead and they're not going to listen anymore. And so
Yeah.
they don't even consult.
So is this the Sanhedrin that's dragging him? I mean, is that what it
It's
sounds like?
Jewish leaders for sure, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's before the high priests. We know that. That's all the way back in 7:1. So this is an
Yeah.
assembly of Jewish leaders for sure.
And it says in 54, when the members of the
54 is
Sanhedrin
Yeah, it's
heard
them.
this,
Right.
and as they heard this, they covered their ears, and yelling at the top of their voices, they rushed
Right.
at him and dragged him out of the city. So how close were they to the city gates?
I don't know my Jerusalem
I don't-
geography well enough to know, but this is not abnormal because they wouldn't have killed someone within the city gates. You
Right.
do that outside. You don't want to
Outside.
desecrate the city. So anytime there was some kind of execution, we know Jesus was outside the city when he's killed
Yeah.
too. So this, no one would have thought about it. This is what would have been done. Yeah.
And so, as the Sanhedrin and Jewish leadership, was Gamaliel part of this mob?
I would think not. Of course, we're not told. But, I mean, he's stood against this before. It
Yeah.
was a different setting a little bit. But he doesn't want any part of this.
Yeah.
And they go a different way. So I don't see him doing that. But, since we're not told, I can't guarantee it.
Yeah. Well, and then, during this rushing at Stephen and dragging him out of the city to stone him, the witnesses laid their coats at the feet of a young man
The feet
named
of- yeah.
Saul.
Right.
And
So he's there. This is our
he's
first
there.
mention.
Yeah, our first mention of Saul.
Yeah.
The good news, if there is good news in this, is that while they were stoning him, Stephen prayed, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." Then he fell on his knees and cried out, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them."
Right.
And when he said this, he fell asleep. And Saul approved of their killing him. That's
Yeah.
how the chapter
That's
ends.
where Saul is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we're back to chapter 8 now. And I think that this is a good point, a good time to read a little message on adversity that I read, because I had a lot of questions for James behind the scenes here about different things. Last week we
Yeah.
talked about, how we don't want to. Does God allow these things, and why does he allow them? Is it
One of
because
the
of
real
a
mysteries.
sinful world we live in, and
Yeah.
sometimes those questions just can't be answered.
Right.
The thing that we do know is that we face adversity. Sometimes it's things that are consequences of our decisions. Sometimes it's just a consequence of us living in a sinful world, and
Correct.
disease is part of that world. Because Adam and Eve chose a world where they made decisions and they were in charge instead of God. So it just is corrupt. Bad things are going to happen.
That's right.
So adversity, although it happens, and it happens a lot in the early church, and that's how the gospel message is spread. Adversity is not God's ultimate desire for his creation, yet there is a clear message that God uses adversity. He is in control over the most adverse of circumstances. We are wrong to presume that God is necessarily in the business of removing our adverse circumstances or reversing the situation that led to adversity. Rather, the Bible points to the conclusion that instead of taking us out of adversity, God is much more interested in taking us through it, using the adversity to affect something good in our lives. I think that's very interesting.
I think it's interesting. I think it's difficult because it's hard to embrace those moments because they're inherently hard. They're not just hard. They can be overwhelming and they can lay us bare, if you will. And
Yeah.
we don't want any of that.
Right, for sure.
And I think what the author there is saying is that we have to try to see what God may be doing in us and through us and maybe even to us in a positive way to help us grow and to carry us through it. And it's still hard.
I look back at some of the hardest things that I've walked through in my life, and I can see that God was there.
Right.
And I can see in hindsight the things that he helps me learn now
Right.
through
Right.
them. But then I look at some things that go on now in my life, and I'm like, God, just change this. Just why are you
Yeah,
allowing this to happen? It's like, don't.
And I don't know that we need to get to the point that we just say, "Oh boy, I can't wait for the next bad time in life. That'll be
Right.
awesome," because that's
Well,
not real.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But can I say, regardless of what happens, I'm going to be confident God's walking with me in the midst of
Yeah,
it, and that
exactly.
He will carry me through, even if it means death, like it did for Stephen. God is still present in that. I mean,
Right.
it's clear that God is present
Right.
with Stephen in that moment. Now, did that mean being stoned was somehow easy? Well, obviously, no.
No.
But does it mean that God carried him through even to eternity? Well, yeah, I think it does. So
Yeah.
God does walk with us through the really hardest things.
Yeah. The author here continues to say adversity is something from which the human condition naturally recoils. But the higher message of the Bible exhorts believers to embrace every circumstance God sends or allows, even to go so far as to consider it pure joy in the hope that God's ultimate purposes will be fulfilled.
Yeah,
That's a really hard place to get to
it is a very
in
hard.
Christian maturity, or in,
Right.
I don't even know if it's necessarily Christian maturity in surrender.
Yeah, I mean, all
surrendering.
those things are
Yeah.
our spiritual development, spiritual
Yeah.
formation, if you want to call
Yeah.
it that, whatever. These are things that I think we're always growing toward, and for
Mm.
me at least, it's not like I ever get there and go, okay, well now I can relax. I
Yeah.
mean, because then the next thing comes and it's still hard.
Yeah. And that's something I've learned through school, especially the last few years that I did Bible college. You you had 6 weeks or 12 weeks of a class, and it was over, and you're like, okay, I've got this. Now I'm on to my next subject. Well,
Yeah.
that's not how faith is, because
No.
faith, you're going to be continuously studying and learning on the same issues of life, because it's all part of
It's
growing. You're
just
just going to
reality. It
maybe a
is.
deeper level of that same lesson, but you're always going to be learning lessons on patience. You're always going to
Yeah.
be learning lessons on self-control. You're always going to be learning lessons on how to surrender to the Holy Spirit rather than fly off the handle, or you know what I mean? It's
Sure.
just, it's a deeper level of surrender.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. All right, so we're on chapter 8, and chapter 8 is when adversity really gets strong, and the church is persecuted, and they scatter from Jerusalem to Judea and to Samaria, and that is in verse 1 of chapter 8. Do you think that Luke is pointing back to chapter 1, verse 8? Like Luke 8:1 is pointing back to Luke 1:8?
No doubt.
No
I mean,
doubt.
Luke gives us sort of an outline of
Yeah.
the way this whole book is going to be laid out at the very beginning, which
Yeah.
is just what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then he marks it as it comes to fruition. So I think he is definitely saying, okay, this is where this happens, and this is where this happens, and
Yeah.
this is exactly right. This is when it's going beyond
Yeah.
Jerusalem into Judea and Samaria.
Yeah. It's just really cool. Saul begins to destroy the church.
Yeah.
Did he not agree with Gamaliel?
I think this goes back to a word that Paul uses in his letters, and we see at work, I think even in the book of Acts. I mean, he is zealous for the Lord and zealous for the law. And his zeal is what motivates him. And his zeal motivated him to want to go and arrest Christians, maybe Christians who have scattered from Jerusalem, and bring them back to Jerusalem
Right.
to have them tried. So apparently he didn't agree with Gamaliel's advice, his instruction, but it's his zeal for the Lord that leads him in this direction. It gets him in trouble. I mean,
Yeah.
he's sort of, this is a good thing. It's focused on a good thing, which is God's law, God's way, God himself.
Yeah.
But it's taking him in a very
In a
dangerous
very bad
place.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of tells me that no matter how educated we are in Scripture, we need to always check ourselves.
Well, these leaders, I mean, they're the ones who want Jesus dead.
Yeah.
And it's because they didn't see that he's the Messiah. So, yeah, regardless of what we know, we need to really think through what we're seeing and what God
Yeah.
may be doing in front of us.
Not
Yeah,
that
for
we
sure.
should doubt everything we know. We shouldn't doubt
No,
everything,
no.
but we should study to show ourselves approved, like the
Yep.
Scripture says, and make sure that we're seeing from God's perspective and not from our perspective, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah. So, apparently, Gamaliel lost his influence on both his peers and his student Saul, it would seem.
It seems so, because they obviously go
Yeah.
in a different direction.
Yeah.
At least some of them do.
Some of
We're
them.
not really told.
Yeah.
Okay, the vote in the Sanhedrin was 54 to 18,
Yeah, no, we're not told that.
so we don't know.
Yeah.
You know.
Chapter 8, Philip, who was one of the appointed elders or distributors of food, just like Stephen was.
Right.
Philip ends up in Samaria when
Yeah.
the persecution starts. He went to Samaria, and he was performing all kinds of signs and wonders. And Simon the sorcerer comes into the story in verses 9 through 25.
Right.
So, what can we learn from Simon the sorcerer? What is the biggest lesson in these few verses?
Well, and without going through the whole story, I mean, part of
Yeah.
it is Simon sees that these new Christians have the ability to work wonders in the name of the Spirit, and he wants to he wants to pay the apostles so he can pass on that same Spirit. And my guess is for him to make money.
Right.
It's all about self-interest, and part of the message here is this is not what the gospel is about. It is not about getting what you want. It's not about your reputation, and it's certainly not about money. It's about surrendering ourselves to Jesus and to God's plan rather than manipulating God's plan for
Right.
our own benefit, which
Yeah.
is a pretty important lesson that
It really
there are people who
is.
need to learn even today.
I can see where I've tried to, a lot of my upbringing was as long as you pray, everything will work out. Well, when you're taking that seriously as like a 5 or 6 year old or, a 7 or 8 year old, and you're reading stories of the apostles bringing someone back to life and
Sure.
Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, you're like, okay, well, anything's possible. With God, all
Yeah.
things are possible. And you just hear those snippets and don't get, I mean, you're very young. And then you
Yeah.
get disappointed when bad things happen that you can't change. And why would God do this?
Right.
We prayed and
Didn't
it
happen,
it
right?
didn't happen, and so it's just a little, not that we wanted it for self gain, but it's that if I do this and this and this, then God will give me what I want. That's kind of a seed of God is able to be manipulated. And I
And
didn't
that's
see that
why
until later in life.
that's
Way later in
why
life.
as we go back in the Old Testament, God condemns things like magic spells and some of the gods, the idols that they would have, because they were all designed to manipulate either nature or God himself to get what they wanted. And here's another example of it. And the point is God is sovereign, not us. We don't get to manipulate God, which means there are times we're going to be a little disappointed because things don't go the way we want them to go. And it points to the fact that this has been going on for thousands of years. This is
Yeah.
not a new issue,
Right.
So we have to, it goes back to surrender. It goes back to allowing God to be God and us not trying to take his place. But as we've said, hard to do because we really think we know better.
Yep. And
We know what we want,
Yeah. And we know what we think or perceive as good and right and the best
Yeah.
way for things
Right.
to go.
Right.
So we're past Simon the sorcerer, and now we've got Philip with an Ethiopian. There's an Ethiopian that's traveling on a road, and God
Yeah.
tells Philip to go south to the road, the desert road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. And so he does, and he hears this Ethiopian man reading the book of Isaiah. So, why was an Ethiopian traveling to and from Jerusalem, and why does he have a copy of Isaiah? Because,
He's likely
scriptures were, that was
expensive.
yes, expensive thing to have a
Yeah.
copy of a
Oh
scroll or
yeah.
a scroll of a book of the Bible. I
Hugely
mean,
expensive
wow.
because it's
Yeah.
handmade in every sense.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
have to have the parchment hand prepared and then The text is going to be hand copied onto that parchment. All that is very expensive. So this guy is
Time
probably, what does it tell us
consuming.
about
Yeah.
him?
It's
He's likely among the group called the God-fearers. So he's not a full Jew, right? He's a Gentile, but he has some idea of who God is, some respect for who God is. And these people were often welcomed into Judea. And he's wealthy. And we're told, that he is an official. He's in charge of all the treasure of Candace or Kendaki, which means Queen of the Ethiopians. And this is probably, as I remember, I have to look this back up, but as I remember, it's probably more like Sudan than what we would call Ethiopia. But either way,
okay.
it doesn't matter that much. The point is, he's been to Jerusalem for a festival because he's a God-fearer, because he has a respect for the Jewish God. He's probably purchased this scroll, very expensive, because he wants to take it home and study it himself. Maybe he's a part of a synagogue back, he's not a Jewish man, but he could have been a God-fearer as an observer. We don't know. Anyway, but he's reading it and he's struggling to understand it. Just like many people who read Isaiah now struggle to understand it
Yeah.
because it's not the easiest thing in the world.
Not at all. So, long story short, Philip is able to talk to him about it, and the man decides he comes to understanding and wants to be baptized. So they go down to the water. Philip baptizes him. When they come out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord suddenly takes Philip away,
Yeah.
and he shows up in another town. I'm not even
Yeah.
going to try it. And preaches until he reaches Caesarea.
Yeah.
So, what do you make of Philip's miraculous travel?
Yeah, well, it's like he's Star Trek teleported, right?
I know.
We don't really know. It just, he
No.
disappears and then he appears somewhere else. Don't have a lot of other instances of something like that in the Bible,
No.
but it's clear it happened here, so it's obviously
Yeah.
miraculous.
Yeah.
God did this because he needed him in a certain place at a certain
Yeah,
time.
I think I think it's awesome. And my game playing kids,
Yeah,
I just
right.
kind of think of their video games. Like, wouldn't it be great though?
Yeah, it'd be nice.
So, how did adversity affect the early church? And this is kind of what we've been talking about the whole time.
Yeah. So, for many people, as we said, they become more and more dependent on the Spirit of God. Philip's a great example of that. Somebody who clearly has allowed God's Spirit to be at work in him and leads him. Certainly, Stephen's another example of that. We're going to see later on that Paul's an example of that, just not yet. So it makes them more dependent. But second, it scatters the church, which is exactly what Luke told us would happen at the beginning. That doesn't mean they scatter in such fear that now they're in hiding. What they end up doing is they scatter from Jerusalem because it seems to be the most dangerous place to be a Christian. But instead of going somewhere else and forgetting that whole era of their lives so that they can now be safe, they start sharing the message of Jesus everywhere they go. So in the end, what this leads to, third, is more people becoming followers of Jesus in places that become further and further afield from Jerusalem. So one of the early things that happens in the life of the church is we recognize this movement is not going to be just a Jerusalem movement. It's going to spread out in what was Jewish Judea, but also into Samaria, and we're going to get to a time when it goes beyond that. And even here we see that we have a man who becomes a Christian, and he's on his way back to Africa.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's spreading pretty quickly.
Yeah. I love it. And so, what about everything we've covered today impacts you the most?
I guess, again, it goes back to sort of where we landed last week. I mean, these people are incredibly brave, but they're also incredibly empowered by God's Spirit. Both those things seem to be going hand in hand, whether you're talking about Stephen or Philip or even this Ethiopian. I mean, they are dependent on God's Spirit to keep them going in the direction God wants them to go. And it ends up fulfilling the very mission that Jesus gave them to go and make disciples. So God's at work in all of it.
It's almost like he had a plan.
It is, isn't it?
All right, so what's next? We're
We will
gonna,
get to Paul, or Saul's
yeah.
conversion on the road to Damascus in Acts chapter 9. And we'll cover mainly the first half of that chapter just because there's a lot going on there. But it is a great story, and it's a key story, not just in the Bible, but it's a key story in the history of the church because
Yeah.
it leads to all kinds of changes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's all I have for today. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Oh, that's it. Yeah, it's
All
good.
right. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. Just let us know if you have questions. We do still have our phone that you can text. The number is 404-565-4498. We always have our email available for you, questions@taylorvillechristian.com. And every Sunday you can fill out a little Connect card. And I had one, and now I've lost it. But you get them in the bulletin every Sunday, fill it out. There's a little place on the back. Send your questions to us, comments, whatever. And read Acts 9 before Sunday.
There you go.
All right. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next
Thanks. Bye.
time. Bye.